Bonjour à tous, donc on va commencer.
Hello everyone, we'll begin now.
Sangye Chötang Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Senam Ki Dola Penshil Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chötang Soki Chonam La Chanchu Patu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Senam Ki Dola Penshil Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chetang Soki Chonam La Chanchu Pautu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Sanam Ki Dola Penshil Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chetang Soki Chonam La Chanchu Pautu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gi Pe Sanam Ki Dola Penshil Sangye Drupa Shu Semchan Tamshe Dewa Tong Dewe Gyu Tong Denpa Gyu Chi Dungner Tong Dungner Gi Gyu Tong Lerwa Gyu Chi Dungner Mepe Dewa Tongpa Tong Minrelwa Gyu Chi Yerin Chadong Tong Relwe Tonyom Chenpo La Nepa Gyu Chi Belden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwo Peme Denchu La Kadrin Chenpe Gone Jesu Te Kosun Tuki Drupsal Tusan Chomden De Jambe Yang La Chak Salu Gongi Lo De Dim Ni Twin Ni Dan Nam Da Grab Salwe Chinye Den Ge Jin Shi Si Shi Ni Ki Tu Ka Leg Bam Zim Gandak Si Pe Seno Mari Min Tum Dung Nyer Gi Si Do Tso Kun La Bu Chi Tan Se La Du Chu Yong Den Song Do Da Cha Do Nye Mo Ni Lo Le Ki Cha Do Do Se Chi Marik Misel Don Nyo Gu Jin Ye Cha Se Ren Trinam De Ne Da Chi Sa Chu Ta Se Nyen De Lu Zo Gyal Se Tu E Ku Chu Da Chu Da Chu Ni Ken Tre Da Kle Mu Se Jambe Yang La Du Tse Den Ke Ki Ken Ra Be Se Ki Da Kle Ti Mu Mun Ba Rab Se Ne Ka Tong Ten Shu Shu Lu Ta Pa Yi Lo De Pa Be Non Wa Tsel Tu Sa
We are studying dependent arising, the fourth theme of the first section of the Entry to the State of a Pandita, a text composed by Mipham Rinpoche. If we go back over the structure, the outline, we covered the summarized presentation of the subject. We're currently looking at the second part, the detailed explanation. In this detailed explanation, we have covered the detailed explanation of outer dependent arising. We covered that last year. And now we just concluded the second part yesterday, interdependent arising. We looked at the causal links and the conditioning links. And we started the third part of the detailed explanation yesterday, which is the explanation of the meaning of dependent arising that is common to these two. In other words, inner and outer dependent arising. In this section, we began the first subsection, which is the explanation of the shared meaning of inner and outer dependent arising. Sorry, this first subsection is called the primary explanation. The root text said, as such, outer and inner phenomena do not arise if a single one among this group of causes and conditions necessary for each phenomenon is not present. If all are present, it is certain that they will arise. Such is the principle of dependent arising. Since beginningless time, there has never been an agent such as the self, an all-powerful creator, or anything else in this series of continuities. Causes do not think, I produce my own effect. Effects do not think, I'm produced by this. The text continues. So we went over that yesterday. Now the text continues saying, nevertheless, the dependent relationship of cause and effect manifests according to 5 specificities. What are they? Here, what Khenpo Rinpoche explained is that dependent arising, the functioning of causes and effects, possesses 5 particularities which were explained by the Buddha in the Rice Seedling Sutra. These 5 particularities explain or clarify the meaning of the term dependent arising. There are various non-Buddhist schools of thought that use this expression, dependent arising, to express the nature of reality. These 5 points or particularities allow for clarifying the meaning of this expression in the context of the Buddhist teaching. We'll see that each of these 5 points refutes mistaken views, although this is not their primary purpose. Before going into detail on these particularities, it's important to keep in mind that here we are considering the perspective of relative reality. Dependent arising is in terms of relative reality. The purpose of these explanations is understanding the functioning of phenomena from a relative point of view, which will automatically lead us to an understanding of their absolute reality. Why? Because these 2 realities, relative reality and absolute reality, are not separate. Through understanding relative reality of phenomena, we automatically come to understanding of their absolute reality. Because phenomena dependently arise, they are emptiness. and vice versa. Dependent arising is more connected to the arising of phenomena in terms of relative reality, whereas emptiness is more linked to phenomena in terms of absolute reality. When we understand the relative reality of phenomena, we understand their emptiness. In other words, the absolute dimension of phenomena. So for now, what we're focusing on is simply a description of relative reality. The Indian master Bhavaviveka said, "Without climbing the stairs of relative reality, you'll never reach the castle of absolute reality." We'll begin with the first particularity. The root text says, "While the seed has not ceased, and so long as it is present, the seedling does not arise. And once the seed has ceased, the seedling arises. This is why the seed is not permanent." As we saw previously in the last course, outer phenomena and the way that they appear are illustrated by the progression of a seed and then a seedling and so forth. Concerning this first particularity, Mipham Rinpoche explains that the seed, the primary cause, is not permanent, is not static or fixed. In order for the seedling to arise, the seed must have ceased to exist. We cannot have the seed and the seedling at the same time. The seed must cease to exist in order for its effect to appear. We can't find a seed that is still present when the seedling has begun its existence. The seed must cease in order for the seedling to appear. Thus, it cannot be permanent. That is a refutation of an eternalist point of view. This first particularity refutes that a phenomenon can be produced by a permanent cause, such as a creator god or a supreme self. A phenomenon, any phenomenon, does not manifest based on a coming together of permanent causes and effects. It manifests due to the coming together of impermanent causes and conditions. That covers the first particularity. Now we come to the second one. The root text says, "When the seed has ceased, the seedling does not arise from a discontinuation." The cessation of the seed and the birth of the seedling appear without interruption, like the rising and falling sides of a scale. As such, the seed is not discontinued. So now we come to the second particularity. We may wonder, once the seed has ceased, does the seedling appear based on an interruption of continuity? No. Even though the seed doesn't exist anymore when the seedling appears, it doesn't mean that there is nothing left concerning the seed. This can be explained in the following way. In general, when we talk about something that ceases, we might think that everything connected to what has ceased no longer exists, that there's no longer anything related to that. That is sort of an annihilationist way of looking at the situation, thinking that everything disappears at a given point, that everything is annihilated. But concerning the process of dependent arising, that's not how things work. Even if the seed is no longer present, there's a bit of the seed that's not really the seed that continues to act, that allows for the appearance of the seedling. Indeed, if everything concerning the seed had ceased, then there would be no seed. No seedling, sorry. Because indeed, what allows for the seedling to appear? Here the question is, what's left? The seed in and of itself is no longer present. The little thing that we call a seed that we put in the dirt waiting for it to disintegrate. However, all of the seed's functionality has not ceased. If this were the case, then the seedling could not appear. So as the root text says, there is no discontinuity. There is no discontinuity between the seed and the seedling. Not everything has yet ceased concerning the seed and its functioning. Something remains, a capacity is there. To understand the presence of this capacity, we can take the example of a chicken with its head cut off. The chicken is dead, but its body still moves. Because even though it's dead, some functionality related to its life is still present. This prana that is spread throughout the body is still present. And this prana that is present throughout the body is still present. Concerning the chicken, this is what causes the chicken to continue to move, even though it is technically dead with its head cut off. Even if the seed has disintegrated, there's a certain functionality of the seed that continues, and this allows for seedlings to appear. Thus, we cannot say that the seed is no longer there at all. But we also can't say that it's there, because if we dig underground, we won't find it anymore. It's disintegrated. It's not there, but it has this capacity which is still present, which allows the seedling to appear. This second particularity is what establishes that the seed, the cause, is not discontinued. Thus, the seedling is not born from discontinuity. This refutes the nihilist school of thought, who affirm that the annihilationist schools of thought that affirm that phenomena appear without cause, for example, the Charvaka school of thought. That concerns the first two particularities. And now we come to the third particularity, where the root text says, the seed and the seedling neither have the same aspect nor the same function. The preceding one, thus, is not transferred into the new one. The third characteristic concerns the fact that the seed is not transferred into the seedling. In terms of their nature and their functioning, the seed and the seedling are different. They are quite different in terms of their nature and functioning. Thus, the seed isn't transferred into the young seedling. There's no transfer. This particularity refutes the schools of thought that consider, that hold that phenomena appear from themselves, which is part of the Samkhya school of thought. For the Samkhya, as we saw in the beginning of the presentation, last course, believe that all material phenomena are produced by Prakriti. According to the Samkhya, phenomena produce, they pre-exist in Prakriti. Prakriti continues its existence. The Samkhya believes that all material phenomena are produced by Prakriti, that they pre-exist in the Prakriti, and that Prakriti continues to exist, that it is transferred into its productions. So this point of view refutes this idea, this conception that phenomena may be produced by Prakriti, that these phenomena pre-exist within it, and that Prakriti continues to exist and is transferred into its products. That covers the first three particularities. Now we come to the fourth particularity. The root text says, a tiny little seed leads to a larger fruit. A great fruit is thus established due to a very small cause. A small cause can therefore contribute to the appearance of an extremely vast result. For example, a tiny seed can contribute to the appearance of a very large tree. In the same way, Khenpo tells us, a small virtuous action, if it is correctly accomplished, can produce a very vast beneficial result. This characteristic refutes the point of view of certain schools of thought which hold that cause and fruit always have the same dimensions. That is the fourth particularity. Now we come to the fifth particularity. The root text says, as in the case of a wheat seedling that appears from a wheat seed, or of a well-being arising from virtue, there is a continuity of similarity between the cause and effect, or conformity of the effect with the cause. Thus, cause and effect always have conformity. We can say that there is a continuity of similarity. For example, a wheat seed produces a wheat seedling and not a rice seedling. According to this same principle, a virtuous action will produce a pleasant result, whereas a non-virtuous action will produce an unpleasant result. Here we refute the belief that phenomena appear from something else. In other words, that cause and effect are two completely different phenomena. That concerns the fifth particularity. The root text concludes this part by saying, it is necessary to know the outer and inner cause-effect relationships according to these 5 principles. These 5 particularities apply to dependent arising in general, whether it is external, such as in the example of the seed and the seedling, or if it is internal, in the case of the 12 components of interdependent arising. These 5 particularities clarify the meaning of dependent arising. Cause and effect have no truly established existence. Causes and conditions appear, and their presence allows for the appearance of phenomena which seem to be produced, but which are no more than simple appearances. Nothing of all this truly exists. To illustrate this, there are analogies that are given. We find this in the next part of the root text, which says, what are the analogies? They are stated in the following quotation. Thanks to the analogies of a recitation, a butter lamp, a mirror, a wax seal, a refractive glass, a seed, sourness, and sound, even if the aggregates connect to a new existence, a Pandita will likewise understand that they themselves are not transferred into it. In order to understand how the relationship of dependence between cause and effect works, in other words, dependent appearance, which manifests according to these 5 particularities, and more specifically, as the text says, even if aggregates connect to a new existence, they do not transfer into it. The Buddha gave 8 analogies in a teaching transmitted to the Nagas called Jewel Encrusted Crown. Oh no, that's the name of the Naga. Then this particular Naga made a request to receive this teaching. These 8 analogies are that of a recitation, a butter lamp, a mirror, a seal, a refracting glass, a seed, sourness, and sound. Out of these 8, Khenpo gave explanations on 4 of them. We'll begin with the analogy of recitation. Khenpo told us, if an individual wishes to recite a text daily in order to engage in a virtuous action, they must first find a teacher who will teach them how to recite the text at hand. Once the instructions have been received from this teacher, then they can engage in the recitation of the text each day. So, what happened? How did the individual obtain this new ability which allows them to recite the text? From a Buddhist point of view, there was no transfer of this ability, no transfer from the teacher to the student, for example. What happened is that following certain causes and conditions interacting, or based on a causal link, a fruit appears, the following causal link. And as this is part of a progression, then at the end, the person has the ability to recite the text in question. In this progression, where each causal link brings about the next one, there is no transfer of this capacity, this ability. This ability of reciting a text simply appears based on a succession of causes and conditions interacting. Thus, it is dependent arising which manifests according to 5 particularities. Now we come to the second analogy, the analogy of a butter lamp, which is traditionally used as a light offering. When, based on a first butter lamp, which is already lit, we light a second butter lamp, what happens? Is the flame from the first lamp transferred to the second lamp? If this were the case, then the flame of the first lamp should cease. And so, Khenpo says, of course, this is not the case. We can clearly see that the flame of the first lamp is still present. Thus, there is no transfer from one lamp to another. From a Buddhist point of view, this simply concerns an accumulation of causes and conditions interacting which allow for the appearance of the flame on the second butter lamp. It is thus dependent arising, which manifests according to 5 particularities. And now we come to the analogy of a mirror. When we take a mirror and set it in front of us, what happens? We see our face. Has our face been transferred into the mirror? No. My face has not been taken from my body and stuck on the mirror. The mirror and my face are also not mixed. They have not become inseparable. The reflection of my face in the mirror is simply dependent arising. Due to the presence of the mirror, of my face, of light, etc., multiple causes and conditions, the reflection of my face appears or manifests. This is dependent arising, which manifests according to 5 particularities. Now we come to the 4th and last analogy that Khenpo explained, which is the analogy of sourness. He said, if somebody in front of us cuts a lemon in half, squeezes it, and drinks the juice while making a face due to sourness, what is happening? What will happen? We ourselves will have the impression that we feel this sourness. Of course, we haven't drunk the lemon, but we still have this sensation of sourness. How does this occur? There is no transfer of the sour taste from the person's mouth to our own mouth. Once again, it's simply a group of causes and conditions that interact and that allow for the appearance of a phenomenon dependent arising. This is dependent arising, which manifests according to 5 particularities. All good? The images they resonate. We have concluded the primary explanation common to inner and outer dependent arising. Now we come to the benefits of understanding in this way. It is said in the root text, if this is understood, one knows that these phenomena are solely unfailing manifestations of dependent arising. But as they are not self-arisen, arisen on the basis of an outer cause, both at the same time or without cause, they are not born. They were not created by an agent such as time, an all-powerful creator, or anything else. There is no life, individual, agent, self, or phenomena as such. They are all assemblages. They are empty and devoid of a truly existing nature. In this way, one becomes free of occurrences such as that of conceptualization of a self in the past, the present, and the future. As we saw just before, functional phenomena are simply dependent arising. They have not appeared from themselves, from something else, from both, or without a cause. All of these modes of birth have been refuted. No birth can be established for phenomena. They are simply dependent arising. They are not born. What are these phenomena? They are assemblages, like a haystack or a rosary. For a haystack, if we take away all the straws of hay, there won't be a haystack anymore. There's only a haystack if all of the hay is piled together. Likewise, for a rosary, if we take away all the beads, there is no longer a rosary. There's only a rosary if the beads are gathered together and strung on a cord. Furthermore, each pearl, each bead is only an aggregation of particles of subtle matter. Thus, there's no bead in and of itself which exists independently from these subtle particles of matter. These phenomena are also empty or fictional, like a mannequin. A mannequin looks like a human, but if we analyze, it's not a human. It's just empty or fictional. The Indian Buddhist master Chödrak said this on the subject: so long as we don't analyze what a person is, we think that they're a person. So long as we don't analyze what a thing is, we think that it's a thing. Similarly, Longchen Rabjam said, all sentient beings see, hear, etc., things and beings with which they are in contact. All these things appear. But in fact, there is no thing, no sentient being. Nothing truly exists. However, so long as we do not analyze what things and sentient beings are, they seem to be present. Phenomena appear and exist on a relative level, but as soon as we analyze them, we realize that they are devoid of essence, of truly existing nature, from an ultimate point of view. Understanding this, we will stop believing that things and beings have a truly established reality, be it in the past, the present, or the future. Next, the text says, of the one who thus accepts the unborn nature of things, the Buddhas will predict unsurpassed enlightenment. Once mind is free of this functioning, where we see reality in inner and outer phenomena, we're able to accept absence of essence, emptiness, as being the reality of these inner and outer phenomena. For most individuals, it's very difficult to accept emptiness due to our very strong habit of seeing things as real. Here, the text introduces this idea of accepting emptiness, because in most cases, individuals who get a glimpse of this emptiness are afraid and turn away from it due to the strength of habit of not considering things from the perspective of emptiness. There are several levels of accepting emptiness, of lack of birth. The first level occurs throughout the 9 steps of the path of accumulation, where a practitioner acquires definitive knowledge of emptiness through study and reflection. This concerns intellectual acceptance of emptiness, acquired by way of study and contemplation. Definitive knowledge arising from meditation or familiarization has not yet arisen. Meditation familiarization is not the main practice of the path of accumulation. This definitive knowledge arising from meditation has not yet come about, despite the fact that meditation is practiced at this point and some experiences may arise on the path of accumulation through one's meditative practice. One of the greatest dangers for a practitioner on the path of accumulation is that of pride arising based on one's meditative experiences. If we're not careful, we may develop attachment for these experiences that appear, and on this basis, pride may also arise. The reason why pride arises is because absence of birth or emptiness has not yet been truly accepted. If emptiness is truly accepted, these mental fabrications would not develop. That was the explanation concerning intellectual acceptance of emptiness, which occurs based on study and reflection over the course of the path of accumulation. Accepting emptiness arising from meditation or familiarization occurs on the third level of the path of junction. There are 5 paths. First, the path of accumulation, then the path of junction, then the path of seeing, then the path of familiarization, and lastly, the path of no more learning, which is the state of Buddhahood. These are the 5 paths that make up the path from a beginning practitioner up through the state of Buddhahood. This acceptance of emptiness arising from meditation or familiarization arises on the third level of the path of junction. The path of junction is the second path, and this occurs at the third level of the 4 levels of the path of junction. On the path of accumulation, the first path, we acquire the view of emptiness, of non-birth. Then, on the path of junction, we will cultivate this knowledge. It will be felt. At the third level of the path of junction, we acquire acceptance arising from meditation. On the path of accumulation, one mainly practices study and contemplation, to some degree meditation, but to a lesser degree. And on the path of junction, meditation is primarily the practice. At the third level of the path of junction, we acquire acceptance of emptiness arising from meditation. On this third level of the path of junction, we obtain acceptance arising from meditation, and additionally, we also obtain our first prediction of obtaining enlightenment. For example, in a dream, a Buddha will predict our obtaining of enlightenment in a future that is closer or further away. Why does a Buddha give the first prediction of enlightenment here? Because at the third level of the path of junction, we are approaching obtaining direct knowledge of emptiness. This direct knowledge of emptiness occurs when we attain the path of seeing, the following path. At the third level of the path of junction, we are approaching this direct knowledge of emptiness. And thus, a Buddha gives the first prediction of our obtaining of enlightenment. Through familiarization, the path of seeing is obtained. Then, the view of non-birth, of emptiness, is directly realized. Prior to this, our knowledge of emptiness was simply deductive or inferential. Now we have direct realization of emptiness. And here we will obtain our second prediction of obtaining enlightenment. This occurs from a Buddha who we perceive directly. From this moment, it is certain that we will attain enlightenment. On the 8th ground, the 8th bhumi, which is part of the path of familiarization, there are 8 grounds, 8 bhumis, 8 grounds of enlightenment. No, sorry, 10. There are 10 in total that make up the path of familiarization. And on the 8th one, there will be a 3rd prediction of obtaining enlightenment. At this point, the moment of enlightenment is known, it is definite. From here on, the point of the 8th ground, there is almost no difference between meditation and post-meditation. Now we come to the next point, the detailed explanation of the meaning of interdependent arising. There is a first sub-point called categories. There are 2 categories. We'll begin with the first category, which is continuous dependent arising. This section begins with a general presentation. The root text says, "As such, so long as ignorance has not been abandoned, the 12 components of dependent arising will succeed one another continuously. On the basis of past causes of ignorance and conditioning phenomena, the present components appear. Projected resulting consciousness, and so forth, up through becoming. Accumulated actions that, with the meeting of afflictive obscurations, craving, and grasping, will establish the new existence. On this basis, one takes birth in the following life in a state of existence congruent with these actions, and due to this support, experiences the suffering of samsara, aging and death, etc. Interdependent arising is thus explained by way of the 12 components of dependent arising. These 12 components can be presented over the course of 3, 2, or 1 lifetime, or concerning the period of time necessary for carrying out an action. These different presentations come from the sutras. These presentations point to the fact that this process, which involves 12 dependent arisings, continues without interruption. It functions as an ongoing cycle and it never stops. Now, Khenpo will give a presentation of the 12 components of interdependent arising over the course of 3 lifetimes, which corresponds to the part of the root text that we just read. In the previous life, we find ignorance, which is the origin of this process. It is the first component. Khenpo says, ignorance is a mental event. It consists in not knowing the true nature of phenomena, the true mode of being of reality. This was explained the first day. Ignorance has several aspects. Here, Khenpo will talk about two aspects. On the one hand, we find ignorance that acts as an obstacle. And on the other hand, we find ignorance that does not act as an obstacle. We'll begin with the first type. Khenpo says, ignorance that acts as an obstacle is a mental construction which believes in a self. It is object-oriented knowledge, a mental construction that sees a self where there is none. It is the belief in the existence of the individual. How does this ignorance act as an obstacle? It prevents understanding the functioning of causes and effects. It prevents recognizing the qualities of the three rare and supreme. It also brings about the appearance, emergence of afflictive obscurations. It is the root of the veil of afflictive obscurations. It is also responsible for actions carried out on the basis of afflictive obscurations. Which creates difficulty concerning being born in the higher worlds. This type of ignorance also prevents being liberated from samsara. It hinders attaining a definitive state of happiness. The nature of this ignorance, which acts as an obstacle, is undefined. In other words, it is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, according to the sutras of the Abhidharma, which are common to the foundational and the great vehicle. The idea of a self is not an action, thus it does not bring about a result. Actions carried out based on the idea of a self can be virtuous or non-virtuous and will then bring about effects. But the ignorance itself is undefined. Nevertheless, according to certain sutras of the Great Vehicle, the belief in a self is, in essence, non-virtuous because it is the source of all non-virtue, because it is the root of afflictive obscurations. Thus, we can find these two points of view. Then there is the second type of ignorance, ignorance which does not act as an obstacle. This consists in seeing mind and its object as separately existing separately. This type of ignorance does not act as an obstacle. It doesn't produce suffering. Khenpo says that this concerns the veil of the knowable. This ignorance does not prevent one from attaining liberation from samsara. And once again, it sees mind and its object as existing separately. It doesn't prevent attaining liberation from samsara, but it does prevent one from attaining the enlightened state of Buddhahood, omniscience. In the context of the Great Vehicle, this ignorance, which does not act as an obstacle, along with the previous one, are both to be abandoned. While, in the context of the foundational vehicle, the first type of ignorance is primarily what is to be abandoned. And lastly here, Khenpo gives an example. I don't have a mug, a teacup, but I do have a computer here. So if we perceive the computer sitting on the table and consider it to exist separately from oneself, this doesn't produce suffering. In order for afflictive obscurations to arise, we must firmly believe that I am a real individual and this computer belongs to me. In this case, anger can arise if someone comes and breaks the computer, for example. So this is the first link in terms of the presentation of the 12 components of dependent arising over the course of 3 lives. So that covers ignorance, the first link. Now we come to the next link. Based on ignorance, actions are carried out. Here, actions corresponds to the second link, component of dependent arising, conditioning phenomena. Ignorance concerned the first of the 3 lives, the preceding life. Now we come to actions as well occur in the preceding lifetime, and based on these 2, we now come to the present life. Based on ignorance and actions of the past life, consciousness is projected into a new rebirth. Here, Khenpo cites some shared points in terms of knowledge of all sentient beings. He says that regardless of one's rebirth, wherever one may be born in samsara, object-oriented knowledge interacts with objects perceived as existing outside of the mind. This object-oriented knowledge also possesses 2 characteristics. It is animate and knowing. And this is in contrast with matter, which is inanimate and not knowing. There are also differences depending on beings. Khenpo explains that object-oriented knowledge functions differently depending on the rebirth one has obtained. For example, a human being has greater intellectual capacity than an animal. Secondly, object-oriented knowledge functions differently even within the group of humans. For example, depending on the merit we have accumulated, some beings will be endowed with a greater capacity for knowledge than others. Khenpo explains that certain beings have a lot of merit and thus have a capacity for extraordinary knowledge. There will be some examples later on concerning this subject. Thus, ignorance and conditioning phenomena brought us to this present life where we have consciousness. Then Khenpo cites the following 7 links: name and form, number 4. This concerns the 5 aggregates. Next come the 6 ayatanas, the faculties that allow for the deployment of knowledge. Based on the faculties comes contact, which leads to sensation, which leads to craving, which leads to grasping, and then becoming. Which brings us to the following life. Based on the 8 previous components and their functioning in this lifetime, a new rebirth appears. This is the component birth, the 11th one, followed by the link of aging and death, the 12th. This is how dependent arising unfolds over the course of 3 lifetimes. Now, Olivier will share an example which illustrates the differences concerning the capacity for knowledge. The first example that Khenpo gave is that of the Arhat Shariputra, who was one of Buddha Shakyamuni's primary disciples. Shariputra had memorized hundreds of thousands of stanzas of the Buddhist teachings, and apparently this capacity for knowledge was so developed that he only needed to hear the Buddha speak on a subject one time in order to understand the meaning and remember every word that was spoken. Ananda, who was the Buddha's primary attendant, asked him one day how it was possible for Shariputra to have this exceptional talent. The Buddha explained to Ananda that it was because Shariputra had engaged over the course of many, many lifetimes in certain specific acts of generosity that yield this specific result, that of great capacity for knowledge. Shakyamuni Buddha explained to Ananda that in the time of Kashyapa Buddha, Shariputra gave sewing needles to the Sangha of Kashyapa, the Shravakas and the Sangha, so that they could sew their robes. Additionally, over the course of many lives, Shariputra gave ink and pencils to poor villagers so that they could study. He engaged in acts of generosity during many lifetimes, which is why he has a great capacity for knowledge and is very intelligent in this life. There was another disciple of Shakyamuni Buddha, a female bodhisattva named Supreme Moon, who also had great capacity for knowledge. At a certain time, at one point, Shariputra and Supreme Moon were talking about Prajnaparamita, higher knowledge gone to the other shore. In the conversation, they were asking each other questions about Prajnaparamita and then answering them. And Supreme Moon's answers were even more precise than those of Shariputra. Ananda, who was still with the Buddha, also heard this, and he turned toward the Buddha and asked, "How can it be possible? Supreme Moon is even more intelligent than Shariputra." The Buddha replied, "Both possess great merit. There's no difference in terms of their merit, but Supreme Moon has generated bodhicitta, enlightened mind. Thus, she has greater capacity." There was yet another Shravaka disciple of Shakyamuni Buddha, Khenpo Rinpoche couldn't recall his name. He was born in a rich family with high social status. He was born into good circumstances. This young man entered the Buddhist path and committed to following a monastic lifestyle. He maintained pure conduct, but concerning his capacity for knowledge, apparently it wasn't so great. He didn't have a very strong intellect. Ananda asked the Buddha, "How can it be that this man, who was born into such good circumstances, has such poor intellect, and that this has such poor intellect, which makes things difficult?" The Buddha explained, because this man, at the end of the presence of the doctrine of Kashyapa Buddha, he was the minister of a king. He had the means to practice generosity extensively. His conduct was good, but he was extremely proud of his accomplishments. When he gave to the poor, he did so while looking down on people. He was generous with them, but he also had contempt for them. This is why today his intellect is weak. Whether a person is intelligent or not depends on circumstances such as the ones that have just been described. Looking down on people, having contempt for others, is a primary cause of weak intellect in one's next birth. Pride is a main cause of weak intellect. It's 4:25. If you have questions, we have 5 minutes. I must be getting a bit confused. So here you're explaining the 12 links of interdependent arising. Earlier there was a quote with these analogies. I can understand the analogy, but concerning these phenomena, there's no link. The mirror recitation, the butter lamp. They illustrate the 5 particularities. The 5 particularities are valid for both outer phenomena and inner phenomena. The 12 links. It concerns the relationship of cause and effect. In other traditions, there's also talk of a cause and effect relationship. But these 5 particularities are specific to cause and effect as it is described in the context of dependent arising. But the 12 links only concern interdependent arising, right? Yes. We'll conclude here. Thank you for your attention.